Doctors Griffin and Boland to conclude, in whichever order.
I might start. I'll take the issues in reverse. What would we do? I suppose the Department of Social Protection is just over 70 years old this year. And more than any department, it has held us together as a society, often through very, very tough times. And we have enormous respect for that department. The forming of that department, particularly, but also its considerable achievements over its life in improving poverty and building social cohesion, are a very substantial political achievement that each generation needs to be renewed against strong opposition, and that's an achievement made in Leinster House. We have a world-class system of social protection in many ways. Okay? It's the envy of many other countries. Up until recently, when we started photocopying failing models, homework, and replicating them unsympathetically here. We need to get back to a human capital-centric approach. That is the approach that brought us to full employment. Like, when we were at international conferences, we're one of the few countries in which we were kind of reporting from that experiences full employment from time to time. We have proved that Irish people are not work shy. We got our long-term unemployment rates down to negligible levels. And so that demonstrates, that shows that the ideology of people are work shy and we need to work people over is not the problem. The problems of our labour market are the problems of our economy, and they're about industrial policy and the creation of jobs. So that's my kind of optimistic, what we need to do is get back to our core values in this area, and the core values held by most of the people working in the system that we have encountered in our research. Just to deal with the IMF EU issue, Dr. Rod Hick in the University of Cardiff's research suggests that the policy choices made here are Irish policy choices. Now, they are encoded in the deal we cut, but it is a contract, it's a deal, and it was on the Irish side that the aspiration for this form of activation came. It was not mandated. And we have a policy choice again, especially as we crest back into an era of near full employment. So, what else we should do is the core target of Jobpath, worklessness, long-term worklessness, is usually and more efficiently improved by a community-based response that focuses on particular communities that experience unemployment and of particular drivers of their unemployment and geographic black spots. And they are long-term developmental with community activities. There's a principle of community development which is nothing for us without us. The Jobpath scheme is being done to people. It's not done with people. In our research, we've encountered all our unemployed people that we talked to, like all 121, attempt to navigate their way out of unemployment, and they are looking for help. They exist in their own personal labour market, not the broad labour market. They have specific geographic restrictions, educational restrictions, aspirations that they're trying to fulfil through the labour market. And supporting them in a really meaningful, human capital-centric way is what we need to do. So Tom is going to talk more about the kind of deadweight effect that is going to the Jobpath has by not being a black spot or a community-led project, but a kind of blunt instrument that cuts across an entire population of people who broadly don't need that kind of activity. Just to pick up on another thing that was said, it's our sense, and this has been relayed to us by a lot of insiders within the department, professionals within the department at street level, at the offices and more at the policy level, is that most of what, or not most, but a lot of what's being done in this would not survive judicial scrutiny. And this relies on the practical reality that unemployed people don't have access to our courts. And specifically, sanctioning is against the principle of natural justice. The sanctioners are judge, jury and executionary. There's no sense of proportionality. The natural justice cycle of clear, unambiguous notice, formal warning, representation, advocacy and appeal are not intact, and the level of oversight is a disgrace in this, and the level of transparency, little bits of information are figured out through PQs, and it leaks out, and that's, if they were proud of this system, it should be open to scrutiny, it should be reporting, and we know this by our county data, that it doesn't appear they work to a consistent standard. There's no standard of work in which you can say, what really delivers this is the high level of appeals that are successful. That if they worked to a consistent standard, there wouldn't be that level of successful appealing going on. Okay, to deal with other issues. Another concern we have is that the case officers working within Jobpath are not appropriate individuals to work with the vulnerable population of people. Typically, they themselves are on short-term contracts because the Jobpath contract is for only 4 years. Clearly, they can't be employed for a longer time frame, and they're paid on a poorly thought out, what's called a performance model, but in reality is more a look-based model. Essentially, if you're in a highly liquid labour market like Dublin, you've got a really good chance of placing people in any job. If you're in Mayo, Kerry, if you're in Wexford, forget about it. Typically, the kind of people that are case officers are business and marketing graduates, usually with an emphasis on sales experience. So while Jobpath has doubled the number of caseworkers, this is done without reference to their capability, character of contract situation. And we have a fear that all this opens the state up to liability downstream. Because of the kind of things that are happening here. So just to kind of conclude, before I hand it over to Tom, our sense is that Jobpath doesn't work. It damages users at the point of use and long term. It damages everybody in the labour market. Because if you think the massaging of CVs, well, companies getting CVs no longer trust CVs because they have to then start validating that this isn't authentically written by the person who's applied for this job. You know, you can't hoodwink employers through an office of the state. And our sense is that the use of outsourced providers here allows people who would have a public service ethos, or it takes them out of the loop and reduces the standard there. It is a very expensive upfront, and based on our concerns about judicial scrutiny, there may be downstream liabilities to Jobpath. So.
Thank you, Dr. Griffin. Dr. Boland, to conclude.
Thanks very much. And taking into account that there's so much been said already, I'll try to be very specific. This issue of the case of the traveller man who had his name changed was brought up by several deputies, so I wanted to reflect on that. That data is protected by the WIT Ethics Board, and we're not really in a position to share it in a straightforward way. We publish reports, books and so on and so forth, which has anonymised data which deals with these things in brief. I think we've submitted several things to the Department of Social Protection and obviously to the Minister also. We will hopefully produce more in the future. It's important that confidentiality is respected in this case. Basically what happened, to fill in what happened, I mean, he was sitting down and he was attempting to cooperate, and then somebody said, right, this is your CV. They changed it online, more or less in front of him, and said, right, I'm going to submit this now. And they just sort of took over the whole thing for him. They just took over the driving seat. He had no agency whatsoever. They just did it to him as such, without his consent at all. Okay, so that's that. I want to pick up on, as Ray says, Jobpath is not really a payments by performance, despite all this talk of payment by outcome. The real thing that's performing here is not Jobpath providers, but the Irish economy. The Irish economy performs, people get better jobs. You can tell by what the quantitative data that even though there's an initial bounce, an initial bump of people making commencements of employment, 25%, which is higher than that which would be without Jobpath, these are people that don't stay in employment for any longer time, and the negative effects of beating them into them using the stick with the threat of sanctions, or sanctions, will have negative effects in the long term. The only thing that it can possibly do is act as a sort of an intimidating middleman that makes sure that people apply for whatever job's going. So it's not intervening in a natural market, but creating a market. It's what we call market coaxing. It forces people to enter the market and to apply for things below what makes sense economically or personally for them. So it's a huge problem in this regard. We've talked about a great deal about what we want, and we come back to the fact that activation is an OECD-wide, EU-wide policy, activation of some sort. The Irish case, or the Irish system, was criticised for years, for decades, for being too passive, and this was, to an extent, a misunderstanding. To an extent, we were active in that we provided training and back to education supports, and the thing that was missing was this thing of conditionality. And as several people have suggested already, and replying to Senator Higgins, work first doesn't work. Human capital building in education and opportunities, training, whatever it is that people choose, does work. So the thing is, though, a system will be designed to follow up some form of activation, and the question is what form of activation. And it's very clear from what we've heard today that it needs to be professionally run, that it needs to be focused on training and so on and so forth. But one of the things that, when we begin to think realistically about these things, is even if they are properly legally administered and backed up and passed by the Oireachtas with proper oversight of the Attorney General, sanctions are a part, and were previously a part, of the welfare regime, except that they were sort of a nuclear option. If you did it, you took somebody's entitlement away entirely. So now we have these smaller sanctions that are being applied very much without responsibility, without due caution. So it's clearly, we need to look at how we do these sanctions. We're not going to remove them utterly, because then there's no stick whatsoever. We really need to look at how we do sanctions. They need to be clearly signposted. They need to be not for all situations. You need to have a difference between those things which are compulsory, maybe attendance at meetings, but everything else being optional as far as possible. Then you need something in regard to making them some sort of proportionality, leniency for first offences or no first offences, a warning. In France, I believe that they have a 3 refusal system. I talked to people in Brittany, and their system appears to be you get to refuse 3 jobs first before you can even possibly be sanctioned, and they have to be looked over and are properly regulated to see that they are suitable jobs for these individuals. We can do this. We can photocopy better policy than the UK policy, I think. In doing this, in reorienting and changing the welfare system, and there will be a new system which will be trumpeted in some sort of way, it's got to undo a lot of the damage that's been done to the economy in terms of low wage and precarious kind of work, but also restore people's faith that when you go in, you will be helped, you will be supported, you will not be subject to caprice, the rules will be explained, they will be clear, and that you will be given a chance, you will be given a generous interpretation. We need to renew the sense that this is a social safety net that you can rely on, and that builds cohesion and a better economy with decent work and an expectation that if you fall on hard times, there will be solidarity and people will help you out and the state will support you.
Thank you very much.